everybody. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Into the Terminal, where I'm joined by my co host and today's producer, Nate.
So if you notice any differences, don't tell Eric.
So, today we're going to be talking about getting help. And for our critical path, we thought we would jump into everyone's first stop for help, Doc or Google.
Yeah, right. So let's be honest, right? Where's the first place you go when you've got a problem you can't solve? You go to your browser's search bar. I mean, we'd like to tell ourselves that everyone goes straight to man or some other command line tool. Those things are great, but come on, who doesn't go to Google first? So we've got a couple examples and a couple tips on how you can more accurately search for the thing that you need to find. And in the deeper dive, we're going to go into all those other options that you're going to find at an actual command prompt, because this is into the terminal after all.
Indeed.
All right, so let's
And
bring up your share.
and I know what everyone's thinking. They're like, really, you're going to tell me about Google? But Google Foo is a real thing. Like
It is.
knowing what terms to use, some of the additional syntax for Google to get like the best results to get you where you need to go. That's what we're going to be talking about. So Nate, how are we
Yeah,
starting off?
right. So now there's a couple tricks and whatnot. I wanted to start off with just be specific, right? So we've got a couple examples here, right? Personally, I don't know why I have this mental block. Whenever I try to make a cron tab, I can't remember the syntax, right? I can't remember which columns are which item, right? I always have to look it up. So I've got a lot of experience searching up how do I write a thing in cron tab. So I figured that was a great example. So the first example here is how do I run a command on a timer, right? Because that might be intuitively in your brain, you might say, well, I didn't put any context. I just put, I want to run a command on a timer. And if you look at this, it looks like you got Stack Overflow first. This may actually be how to create a batch file timer to execute, call another, right? That's not quite exactly what you're looking for. When I tried this earlier, I found a bunch of videos on how to do it on Windows. I found information on how to do it in other operating systems. Not exactly, if I dug, I probably would have found what I was looking for, but it's not an efficient use of time. So what if we try, how do I run a command on a timer in Linux? Now, there's a bunch of ways you can run a command on a timer in Linux. Let's see. Google has helpfully given us an exact, a step-by-step here that it's decided is probably relevant. Let's see. It's telling us to.
This is using an option for ping that it will
Right.
time out after 30 seconds.
Again, not quite what we're looking for. I mean, maybe if you were lucky, that was exactly what you were trying to do. But what we're trying to do is run it in cron, right? If you were to scroll through here, you'll probably find articles on how to use it with how to use it with systemd timers, how to use it on. Maybe you'll still find things that are on other Linux distributions that aren't the one that you care about, right? And that's another point we're going to talk about. So what if we say with cron? How can I make a bash command run periodically? That'll probably get us exactly what we want. And just looking at the preview there, looks like that's probably pretty accurate, right? But there's still a chance, depending on basically what the algorithm thinks you want to see, which search engine you're using. We're using Google as an example because that's a lot of people's default. You may end up with stuff that's not exactly relevant for what you are looking for. When I did this via DuckDuckGo earlier, I found a bunch of things that were still not exactly just straightforward. How do I put a thing in a cron tab? What I usually search for, which usually gets me exactly what I'm looking for, is just the words cron tab syntax. It's concise. It doesn't have a whole lot of extra terms in it that might confuse the search results. And it's pretty much dead on what you're looking for, right? And that cron tab syntax or cron tab quick reference at the top there will probably get you exactly what you're looking for. Now, this assumes you know where to put it, right? So this isn't going to be a how-to, but if you're already somewhat familiar with the thing you're trying to do and you're just trying to find that specific thing, be as specific as possible, and then you'll end up with something that is relatively specific.
Yeah, and I know that that's probably the more challenging thing because you have to know that there is a technology called cron or cron tab in order to
Right.
put it into your search history. So, like building your lexicon of Linux and the commands and technologies that are included with it helps you get to where you need to go faster.
Right.
So, uh, the other thing that we can do is some other tips, kind of tools of the trade. So, for example, um, I'm going to share my other screen. So, 1 second, and producer Nate will do the needful. Okay. So, we are looking at a RHEL 9 box, and it's been behaving weirdly. So, I'm going to look at the logs. And actually, I'm going to do 20 lines of logs. As I'm looking through, like, kind of what's been happening recently on this machine, I see something weird
Out of
right there.
memory.
Yeah. Um, and so this is an error that I'm not used to seeing. Let's Google it, right? And it turns out like how you Google it is going to dictate what kind of responses you get, just like we were seeing with crontab, right? So if we switch back over to the other Google window, I'll just populate it with content I've already got preloaded. All right, so let me go back to just regular Google. And we'll take a look at it with the screen share. Um, so what we could do is start to put in terms from that error message, right? So if we Google um, out of memory, that was part of the message, but it tells me about a condition on the system called out of memory. As I scroll down, it talks about like fixing memory problems on Windows, which is really not what I'm interested in, right? Because I'm not using Windows. So the other thing we could do is maybe do the other side of that error message, right? It said out of memory kill process. So if I do a Google for kill process, um, that's not what I want. It's telling me about how to use the kill command to kill processes, which isn't what's happening. So what we might do, and what I often do when finding error messages that I'm interested in, is I will use the whole error message and I'll put it in quotes. Putting in quotes says to Google, you have to display results that have this exact string in them. And
Those
that
uh
way, I'm looking for content.
those search suggestions are dark. Kill, sacrifice child. Ah!
Yeah.
Anyway.
Um, so we're looking at like an exact string that has to exist in my search results. And so I should get much better results out of this exact search. Oh, yeah. Out of memory killer function kills a process when RAM is low. Like all of a sudden, we start to get really specific results based on that quoted error message. The other thing we might do is because we're using Red Hat Enterprise Linux, is we might tell Google that we are interested in that. So we could do things like add a site specification.
Right.
So this says, I want to search for this exact string, but only on pages that exist on this domain, redhat.com, and check out the awesomeness that comes back. Not only do I get information about what this error message means, I also start to get things like, hey, how do you troubleshoot this? That's the exact kind of content I need when I'm having an error that I'm trying to investigate. So things like quoting your content to make sure that it's using the whole message exactly as it appears, uh, fixing your search to only look at specific sites where you know that there's going to be quality content you may be interested in. That's the kind of stuff that you want to do. Um, The other thing that I wanted to give an example for was generic versus specific Linuxes. So let me go back to straight Google. All right, so if we're talking about Python 3.8 Linux, cool. There we go. It's offering me to download the source code for Python and like compile it myself onto my machine or Ubuntu. Well, those don't really help me because
You
one,
don't want to compile it
compiling
yourself?
software
Isn't that
not
the
when
right
it's
way?
not when it's provided by Red Hat because then it's supported and compiling yourself is not and it may break stuff. I'm certainly not interested in installing deb packages on my RHEL box. So instead of just doing generic searches, if you put in something like "give me this on RHEL," now all of a sudden you start getting really specific things. And again, if we add on our site limitation, hey, this is like really zhuzhy results. Um, exactly what I'm interested in. How to install it, what to do, right? So the more changes you make, the more specificity you provide, the better your results are going to be.
Aaron would like to know where your sense of adventure is. Why
I'm
aren't you
feeling
building your everything from source?
like all right. So stay with us. After the transition, we'll actually talk more about the on-system documentation and where you can go to find help there for things that you don't have Google for, or maybe it's something
Right.
not worth Googling because you're in the midst of doing something and looking at a man page or doing a command help. Maybe the easier, more effective way of getting you what you need.
Or perhaps you're just in an environment where you can't get to the internet.
Also, yes.
Like on a game show where you're locked in a room and have to answer what's the proper command line argument to remove colors from ls.
Right. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video if you found it good so far. Stay with us after the transition, and we'll get even more into the terminal.
All right, we'll be right back.
Hey, Nate.
Welcome back.
So we have a little thing going on at Red Hat this week.
We do. Do I need to go get my hat? It's right there.
So for the viewers who are not Red Hatters, um, this week is We Are Red Hat Week, which is an internal celebration of being Red Hatters. Um, And so we do all kinds of stuff. Like we always tease Nate about his Shadow Man branded stuff. We call it vintage Red Hat stuff. And so today I decided, yeah, we even have the same mug. That we should throw back some Shadow Man. Also, I went ahead and pulled in. Oh, whoops, this way.
Wrong shoulder.
There we go. All of my Red Hat Linuxes and enterprise Linuxes, because like good times. We've been doing this a while.
So why is it we are Red Hat Week, Scott? Something happened around this time of the year, what, like 27 years ago? 28 years ago?
Uh,
Long time ago.
I'm about Yeah. So we always do it in October. And in October, the very first version of Red Hat Linux was released.
Right,
Actually, it wasn't the very first version, but it was the most popular initial version called the Halloween release of
right.
Red Hat Linux.
With the terrible bat.
Yes, the terrible bat and the horrible hat. Like it was like a weird
Yeah,
10
it was
gallon.
like a stovepipe hat or something. It was crazy. Ah, the history of Red Hat.
Yeah, good times. All right, so we're going to jump into getting more help on our terminal and through the system itself.
Right, right. So, first of all, most commands, in fact, I would wager all commands, or at least all standard and well-written commands, have basic command line help built right into them. Many of them, if you run the command without any arguments or with the improper arguments, it will give you a very basic suggestion on how you should run the command. But I mean, I don't recommend doing it that way. But if you do flub a command, it'll give you like, hey, you need to work on your syntax. Maybe you should check the help. And you can do that by doing dash dash help. There you go. And see, there it is. It's like, I don't know what the dash F command is. And, even if it did, that may have totally borked your hard disk. But dash dash help or dash H are the most common ways to get this particular output that Scott is looking at. Now, every command is going to be different. I've seen some that use dash question mark, although that's a lot less common than the dash H and dash dash help. You'll also notice that a lot of commands have both a short and long, right? So dash H is the shortened version of dash dash help, right? So just good things to keep in mind, right? There's also in some cases, if you are, say, Googling for how to run a certain command, what version of that command you're running may be relevant. And in that case, you can usually do a dash V or dash dash version to get that output, right? And again, this may be different depending on what command you run, right? So if you check dash dash help, it'll usually tell you what the command is. There you go. So I guess dash V did not do it for Python. Is that what I saw scroll past there? Dash dash
It
version.
was running Python in verbose mode.
Well, that's another thing I wanted to call out, which is not necessarily a help command, but will usually help with debugging and troubleshooting. Is the verbose flag for many commands? If you expect command line output, a lot of times things are suppressed. But if you do dash dash verbose or sometimes dash capital V, and again, this is something you're going to have to find in the command line help. It'll give you more output to give you an idea of what's going on with your command. That's not necessarily a help command, but I think it's tangentially related.
Indeed. And some like RPM here, as it's typing it in, you can add more verbosity by just adding more
Yeah.
V's.
SSH is the same way. If you're trying to troubleshoot an SSH connection, you add like 28 V's and you get all of the all of the output.
Man, that's a lot of V. That's a lot of verbosity.
Okay. I mean, it probably stops tracking at about 3, but you could add 28 and it'll still give you 3. So
All right, the other on system help that is really common is man pages. So we can
yeah.
look at something like the man page for LS. And man pages all kind of have a standardized format, which is they start with the name, a brief usage description or synopsis of how you would call the command, and then a longer description, which usually goes through all the options that you can pass with it with details on what those options do. After those sections, things get a little bit more varied, maybe less standardized, let's call it that way. But some other sections that I like, see if we have it. Oh, we do. So one of the sections I really like is examples. So some commands will have this section in their man page, which actually is like, here's how you run commands to do these specific things. And I actually use this one in iSCSI ADM all the time because I can never remember the syntax for using it. But this goes through kind of the standard operations that one would use with iSCSI, so I can literally copy and paste it and then adjust things like the IPs or the IQN target name that I need to do for my system. So like man pages are really cool. I like using the search functionality. Man pages use the less command as its pager for viewing it. So you can do keyword searching in it. So for example, when we go back to LS, we can do a / color.
Almost on cue there, Scott. Shantanu just asked, "What's a good way to search for the proper command for man pages?"
I mean, we're like simpatico. So yeah, I like using / and then typing in the specific term I'm looking for, and then it will take me to those places. And you can use the N command inside of the less pager to take you to the next match and the next match, which will kind of walk you through if this was not the instance you were looking for. So I can use N to kind of advance through to every place where that keyword I'm searching for exists all the way to the end. And then when you're finished with man, you can Q to quit out of the less pager.
Right.
So Nate, any tips and tricks on less?
Not necessarily on less, but I did while I was poking around on cool things you can do with man in preparation for the show today. If you don't know how to use man, you can man on man. You can literally just do man space man. It'll give you some ideas on like how to interact with man, because there's certain cases where you might be looking for a specific man like sub page of a command, which I was busy in chat. I didn't notice you if you covered that, but you'll notice that sometimes when you look at man, it'll say, like cron tab and then parentheses 3 or parentheses 5, right? Those are other sub pages of that particular topic, right? And you can do a man and then the number and then the command, or not the thing you're searching for, and it'll give you that particular page, right? That's a thing that is not as intuitive as you might think. But if you check man's man page, it tells you how.
And we'll get to what those sections are in just a minute when we talk about
Yeah.
doing keyword searching for man pages.
Am I getting ahead of you?
I like go off on a slight tangent. Nate, would you like to have story time?
Story time. I don't know. Do how how on time do we have to be today? We don't have Eric telling us to speed it up.
Yeah, we don't have
Story
Eric.
time's good. Let's go with story time. It's We Are Red Hat Week. It's all about story time.
So when I was a young application developer and system administrator, I had a senior person that I worked with who was amazing, literally knew everything. And so when I had a question, I would like go down to his office and ask him questions, and he'd be like, "Okay, so here's what you want to do," and he'd like give me this like super long pipe together command or like uh, a segment of code that I needed to use that he crafted. And after about a week, he was tired of it, as one can imagine. And so he started when I'd come in and be like, "Hey, how do I?" He's like, "Did you read the man page?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know what man page." He's like, "Ah, did you search through the man pages?" And if the answer was yes, then we help me 100%. But if the answer was no, his response was, "Why don't you go look at the man pages and then come back to me if you still have questions?" And at the time, it was kind of frustrating because like I knew he knew all the things. Like, just tell me the things. And
Yeah,
in reality, like reading man pages is hard. It is not a book. You can't start at the top and read all the way down the
yep.
bottom. You need to
You
develop a
could.
methodology for like figuring out how to get the information you need. And
Right.
that's I learned things like keyword searching. And ultimately, like, at the time, I thought Chris was being unreasonable. But in reality, like Chris was helping me develop a skill that I have used for many years. And hats off to Chris for making me learn those skills. There you go. Thank you, Nate.
Tip of the fedora, right?
One of the things
It's
was
it's
like I didn't.
the old what is that? Oh, sorry. I just thought of the less appropriate teach a man to fish and he will eat for the rest of his life. Like, what is give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for the rest of his life. There's another one about building a man a fire or setting him on fire. That was the one I remembered first and not as appropriate.
Not as, um, but in addition to like developing the idea of how to read a man page and how to get the information out of it, there's also like, especially for those of us who are new, you don't necessarily know the command lexicon, right? So like, how do I find the command that
Right.
I to know about? And so the way we can do it is man dash K. And so if you want to know about memory, like man dash K, keyword search all the man pages for the keyword memory. And what it does is it looks through the command name and the one line descriptive blurb, the short description of that command. So we could see here's the list of commands: chmem, free, get credential cache. Like that's the list of commands. And then over on the other side of the dash, this is their brief description. And so if I was interested in looking at how much memory is on the machine, if I look through this list, probably something like free, display the amount of free and used memory on the system.
There you go.
Or, yeah, maybe VMstat, report virtual memory statistics. So both of those would be interesting. I can either just run the commands or I can actually look at their man pages, right? Like I do a man free and scan through to see if this is really the command I'm interested in. Another one that I found that we're going to talk a little bit more about, man password. Oops, sorry, man-k password. All right, so this one has a lot of results. So, hey, I'm interested in passwords. Well, there's a lot of stuff about passwords. And so again, I could like look through the list, but there's some additional things that I could know that will help me get through this list a little bit easier. And this is where we return to the sections that Nate was alluding to earlier. So man pages are divided up into groupings, and certain groups talk about certain things. So for example, section 1 of the man pages is about user run commands. So see change there, the very first response to my man-k, that's in section man pages. So that's a command that like regular people can run on the system. And it changes user password expiry information. That's probably not what I want for passwords. Then the next couple, they're in section 8. Section 8 is system administrator commands. So as a regular person, I'm probably not interested in batch changing people's passwords. As a regular person, I'm probably interested in my own password.
I mean, maybe you are.
Well, fair.
Depends on what kind of coworker you are.
I may be interested in batch changing people's passwords, right?
Yeah.
So those section 8 ones there. All right, then there's a bunch that are Google Cloud thingies. That's because this
Tracklib, that's what we want.
Google that installed some Google Cloud software, and there we go. Down towards the bottom, get credentials, section 7. Section 7 is programming somethings like programming. We'll have to, hey Nate, can you pull up a man on man and see what section 7 is? I know it's programming something, but he'll get back to us with the exacts.
I would think section 7 is where they hide all the alien artifacts. That's what it sounds like to me.
That's section 54.
Oh, okay.
Up here, login defs, section 5. Section 5 is configuration files. So if I was
Section 7 is miscellaneous, including macro packages and conventions.
So section 5 is configuration files. We see that also down here with Shadow's man page, because it's talking about the Etsy Shadow configuration file. And then the only other one that I see that's kind of interesting here is section 3. Now you'll notice the Shadow has 2 entries, one in section 3, one in section 5. Section 3 is about C programming libraries. So if you're interested in writing a C program that interacted with the shadow mechanism for Linux, section 3 might be interesting to you. But shadow section 5 is what you're probably more interested in as a system administrator. And in fact, if we just do a man shadow, it gives us the first one it finds, which is the section 3 one. And look, there's all the like structs and includes and voids. And it's like, well, that doesn't look like password stuff for Etsy Shadow. But if we do a man section 5 shadow, right now we're talking about the shadowed password file. And if we go a little bit further, it actually goes through and gives me a description of what each field in that file stands for.
Right. And to tie back to our Googling from earlier, my examples of cron tab, if you're looking for the cron tab syntax, and if you just do a man on cron tab, what you get is the command cron tab, which is used for managing cron tab files. It does not give you the syntax. But cron, I think it was 5. File formats and conventions. Yes. Gives you what the format should be. Those fields there that you just scrolled past. Gives you exactly what you would have been looking for. It doesn't give it to you in, the column output, but it tells you which, what does what.
Oh, but look.
There you go. There's examples at the end.
All right. One other quick note. I was talking about man-k and doing keyword searching. That actually works off a database that is built nightly or through anacrontab if you're booting a machine and it hasn't run cron jobs in a while. So that means that if you're booting a fresh box from a cloud instance or maybe a virtual machine, or it's a box that you've not booted in a while, it might not be there. So if you want to make it, make what is no update db. There we go. That will update the man keyword database, and it does it immediately. So now I can use man-k on that system that I couldn't man-k before. The error message you'll get is really dumb. It'll say man-k something, nothing appropriate found. And it's like, it's nothing
Yeah.
appropriate found because there's no database for it to query against.
Right.
So BTB will fix that for you.
Cool. So there's been a couple questions, mainly from Tony in chat about, I guess he's looking at taking a Red Hat exam, RHCSA. My comment earlier about being in a strange circumstance like a game show where you don't have any access to the internet also applies to exams. So a lot of what we're talking about today, at least not the Google part, but everything after the break, will definitely apply to if you're sitting for an exam because you will have access to all of this. So, and there's no secret there, right? I didn't just release some secret sauce. Instructors will tell you that during your classes. So, not a big deal.
Any other questions from chat that we should handle before we jump into the next segment, Nate?
There's been a lot of conversation, not much in the way of questions.
All right.
Shantanu had some stuff about the -K. See Rick in there. Hi, Rick. Helping answer questions like the good Tam that he is. All right. So, what was next? Oh, right. Ansible. We like Ansible, right? And we like RHEL system roles too because they're sort of Ansible based, but they're not always intuitive, right? And there's not always a man page. In fact, this actually makes me wonder if do the RHEL system roles end up in man? Maybe we could that.
Find out. Let's see. DNF install RHEL system roles.
It's good that you're doing this because one of my examples is to go look at the readmes for these, and if you didn't install them, we wouldn't have them.
All right, so let's do a RPM QLD on RHEL system roles. All right. So a lot of user share doc and user share Ansible roles and user share Ansible collections. By the way, QLD is query this RPM for a list of documentation. And so there's the read that you were talking about and the change log you're talking about, Nate. But no, it doesn't look like there are man pages for this one at all.
Okay. Well, good. Then that means that my example is still just as relevant as I hoped it was going to be. So there's two ways to get help with, well, I should say there's one way for Ansible like built-in modules, and there's another way for system roles. So first we're going to talk about ansible-doc, which is sort of like man, but for Ansible commands, right? And my example here is, so, you're writing a playbook and you already know there's a module called something. In my example, I'm using user because you can use user to create users with Ansible. But you're not quite sure what options you can throw in there. If you do an ansible-doc space and then the name of the module you're trying to work with, assuming your system knows about it and the module's already there, so ansible-doc user will give you the documentation on user, right? And it'll give you some pretty well-defined examples and everything. So this is really useful if you're just quick trying to write up some Ansible stuff. You're at a command line or you're in an environment where you can't get to Google, because you will find a plethora of stuff on Google, which may or may not apply to the Ansible core that comes with RHEL, right? So you'll know that this stuff should apply to what's installed on your system, right? So that's one way to get help with Ansible. And like I said, if you were to scroll down, you'll find examples that you can almost just copy and paste change some of the details, and you're up and running. They may be way down there. I think there's a section called examples. Maybe, maybe not. There should be. Just see also. There's examples. You just didn't go down far enough. So there you go, right? You could literally copy and paste these into your playbook, and boom, you've got you can create a user with Ansible, and this will work, like I said, for any module that's already installed in Ansible Core. Now, this doesn't cover RHEL system roles, though. I did try to see if ansible-doc would just include RHEL system roles information. I'm not sure why it doesn't end up in ansible-doc. Maybe because it's a role, which are sort of a collection of modules, and it doesn't really belong in ansible-doc. However, those README files that Scott found while doing that RPM command earlier, they're in user share Ansible roles, and then you'll find subdirectories for RHEL system roles, whatever, right? So if you did like a tab, you should see a list of a whole bunch of them. He's doing storage. Okay. And this is, a markdown file. And if you were to go to the Linux system roles upstream, or I think the RHEL system roles documentation on Red Hat, you'll find this exact documentation, except, the markdown is translated into something that's a little more readable. But this is a great way to get started with system roles as well, right? Similar to ansible-doc, but specific to these roles. I can't hear you, Scott. I'm not sure why.
There's one other place
There we go.
we might look to, which is the user shared doc directory. So it is commonly the case that packages will put stuff into user shared doc, like maybe a README, maybe the license that covers that software, and then some packages put even more stuff there. And we could do my RPM query again to like list packages documentation to try and see if there's stuff there. But earlier today, I installed kernel doc RPM, and that gives you the kernel's documentation. So maybe,
Sure, it's riveting stuff too.
oh, it's awesome. So you can look at things like all the System 390 things that you always wanted to know, but were too scared to ask, like what's System 390. But I was thinking, I've been using this more recently. Nate and I have been working on a project, and one of the things I was looking at was virtual memory management of the kernel. And so, like, here's a bunch of stuff on like the settings and parameters of how the kernel does virtual memory management. You can go in here and read these documentation files, like I don't know, over commit accounting. So this is
Transparent huge pages.
Yeah. Transparent huge page is another good one. And they're just as riveting as man pages, if you were concerned. But yeah, so a lot of things will put things in user share doc too. So man pages, very common. Help options, very common. User share doc, less so. Specific documentation based off the application, even less so. So like if I'm looking for help, I would start with command line option, man page, and then kind of go from there.
Right. Shantanu brought up a good point, and I had forgotten about this command, info, which seems to be just another way to get to the man page at this point.
I had not forgotten about info. I elected to not include it.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you can blame Shantanu.
Well, Shantanu loves Emacs, so what do you expect? So info was a GNU application that aimed to improve man pages, which is like, okay, great. I'm all for improvements. And so for a long time in Unix world, man pages were the standard. And then the GNU Foundation or GNU organization was like, we can do better. So they created this standard called Info, And the command that we ship, or the RPM that we ship, is called pinfo, that will get you access to them. And the idea there is that you have hypertext linked documentation, right? Man page is like one giant, starts at the top and ends at the bottom. And you got to go through the whole thing. Info, and let me see, before I share my screen, let me see if it's installed.
Seems to be installed on my machine out of the box, but my machine's not a good demo system because it's just one of my lab machines that is really not set up for demoing.
Yeah, I'm installing it on this box. So the RPM that provides it is called pinfo, and we can do something like info grub. Oh,
It's P info. Mine actually just has info.
see, this is what happens when we go off script, Nate.
Yeah. I want to see what installed it for me. Weird that I have it and yours doesn't. Yeah, it's included with system. It came from the package info. So you installed pinfo. Mine installed info. That's why mine's info and yours is pinfo.
Let's see. Oh, it is info. That's my mistake. All right, let's try this one more time. Info grub. There we go. Okay. So it's basically like hypertext linked stuff. So here's the list
Did a
of
thing.
where we can go from this landing page grub. So you move the cursor down to the thing that you want, like maybe it's I don't know.
Graphical menu software design.
Sure. So and then you hit enter, and then here you go. Jumped you to that section of the documentation, and maybe you're interested in the GUI components. So there you go. There's the GUI components. And there's like a whole bunch of commands that you use within info to like go backward if you selected the wrong thing, or go to the next item in the list. So it has its own command lexicon that basically controls this hypertext linked interface of info. So that's why I did not include it, because it's like there's some stuff, but to Shantanu's point, like grub is one of the things that's pretty well documented here. That's not well documented through the man subsystem. So some things are well documented through info. Emacs, Nate. Emacs is documented through yeah. And then just like man, if you quit Q, you get out of it.
I guess that explains why it has those all those extra commands then, because Emacs.
Well, I mean, like again,
The same brains who made Emacs.
I mean, it is a more capable way of formatting
Yeah.
documentation for your application, right? Because now you don't just have to write it in this giant trof or nrof file. But along with complexity comes complexity. So you get
Right.
to figure out all the navigation, and now it's not just a single file that gets installed on the machine. It's like a bunch of smaller files that get linked together through the hypertext linking capability of the utility.
All right. Well, I think we've pretty exhaustively covered how to get help. I guess there was one final thing to touch on, and that's if you are a Red Hat subscriber. This is not included with the developer sub, but if you're an enterprise customer paying for support and whatnot, there's also Red Hat support, right? Don't forget that if you're a real customer. And one thing you're going to want to know how to do if you're opening a support case is generate an SOS report. We don't have a lab or anything, a demo on that, but it's a thing you should be aware of and look into. Maybe we'll put a link to the knowledge base article in the notes for today. But yeah, really helps your support rep. If you're asking a very simple, basic question, whatever. But if there's anything that requires some troubleshooting, just make the SOS report and attach it.
Yeah, and I think the troubleshooting piece is key, right? SRS report, if you've not seen one before, is an archive of all kinds of files off of your machine, including logs, including configuration files, some output of commands like free and stuff like that, so that the support technician working on your case can actually like kind of see what's happening on the machine with this snapshot of data that's been submitted with an SOS report.
All right, and I think that covers getting help on RHEL. Any final
Yeah,
thoughts there?
man, we covered a lot. Oh, I did have one thing. Shantanu did correct me. I said update DB fixes your man-k. That's incorrect. That fixes locate, which is a completely different thing. Make what is the command that you want to make your what is database for man. So thanks for that correction, Shantanu. And then coming up in the next week, we're going to be doing RHEL Presents. Actually, RHEL Presents is 2 weeks, which is the RHEL development story. And then next week here on Into the Terminal, top 5 user administration tasks.
Yeah. How to change everybody's passwords.
Ooh, let's just, wow. Okay. Now what I want to hear as a user. I actually not too long ago. I was looking in the users and somebody had the same first name as somebody else's last name, and I incorrectly changed the wrong person's password. That was, ooh, not great on my
Oops.
part.
At least you
Yeah.
didn't delete them on accident.
Wow, that would be really bad.
Yeah, yeah. Not something I'd ever do, ever, because I'm way too careful for that. On that note, I think we're done. Any final thoughts or anything people should be doing, Scott?
Do better on Google. Develop that Google foo, and then develop that man page foo, right? Of figuring out how to get access to the stuff that you're
Yeah.
really interested.
So when you're in a game show situation where you're locked in a room and have to come up with how to get commands out, you're ready. You're prepared.
You're ready.
All right, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you all in a week.